Yes, thank you, Amir Shah. Of course, you can start.
So, why do you think it's important to observe World Refugee?
It's a good point that you said to observe the refugee days, because I don't know if the celebrate is the right word. But anyway, it's very important to draw the world attention for the Refugee Day, as this issue is one of the biggest humanitarian issues caused by wars and conflicts in the world. According to UNHCR, by November 2021, so we are talking about the last year, we are not talking about this year, more than 84 million people have been forced from their homes. You can imagine the number, 84 million. For example, in the Syrian crisis, the number of Syrian refugees has reached about 6.6 million, distributed in 126 countries around the world. So here, when we are talking about Syria, we are talking about 22 million people were living in Syria. So we are now talking about 1/3 of the Syrian population. They are refugees. Of course, we are not talking about the internal displacement. If we are talking about the internal displacement, we are talking about another 6 or 5 million, according to the UN. Can you imagine that, Amir Shah? Yeah. Can you imagine each family suffer of these 84 million refugees around the world? So the least we can do on this day is to advocate for their cause and demand their rights to live a dignified and safe life, and also demand for more laws about that justify them.
That is actually so the number that really hit me, because everybody knows about the refugee crisis, but talking about a country's 1/3 population, and that is completely unimaginable. And
Yes.
this really describes the amount of disturbance that was happening inside the country as well. So how have you been, and how has the non-profit been working to help these people? If we can get a small
Let me be frank. Our organization, as the rest of the organization working in the Syrian context, they are working inside Syria to help the people for their primary needs. But we are also, as a humanitarian organization that works mainly in northern Syria and southern Turkey, we are constantly working to advocate and talk about the refugee issue, and participate in any activity that raise awareness about refugees and the conditions that led them to asylum, the suffering, the difficulties they face in the host countries. We are also, as Ghiras Al Nahda, as GAN, carrying out some projects in partnership with some international organizations and some United Nations agencies to enable refugees with some skills that increase their access to job opportunities, as well as projects that enhance their integration into host societies. And this is the most important point. For example, in Turkey, if we are now talking about the Syrian context, in Turkey alone, we have 3 million Syrian living inside Turkey because of the conflict inside Syria. Most of these people have left Syria because of the existing conflict, as I mentioned. So we are trying with our sources, with our limited sources, to increase their ability and increase the cohesion with the society inside Turkey, which is very difficult work.
Since we are talking about the other neighboring countries of Syria, how do you feel in general the countries that receive the refugees respond, and why is the reason they respond that way? Because I'm very much aware that the response is not positive. So why do they do that?
Again, when we are talking about the Syrian context, we are talking about mainly Turkey, which has, as I mentioned, 3 million Syrian. We are talking about Lebanon, the poor country, which has about 4 million people. Lebanon has about 1 million Syrians. Jordan also, the poor country, has about 1 million refugees of Syrian. So I don't know. I cannot evaluate the government work in these countries, and this is not our job as organization to evaluate their job as governments. But I think they have limited sources for their people before the Syrian crisis. So it's more hard to them to deal with the refugee issue, and that makes the things worse and worse for the Syrian refugees, also for the host countries.
Yeah, like you said, since these countries themselves are not very strongly stable, so it will become nearly impossible for them to accommodate such a large population. And considering countries like Lebanon, so it's like the people that they already have, they're receiving equal number of displaced people.
Yes, exactly.
So how does this refugee crisis affect the economy of a country, or if we talk about the whole world in general, so how does it affect the economies?
Okay, in fact, this is a very long issue to talk in, and I think we have to bring some specialists to talk about the economic effect of the refugees. But indeed, I can say that the economic fallout is no less damaging than the humanitarian costs for the stability of the region and its longer-term development potential. As I told you, Jordan, Lebanon, also Turkey need development for their societies, for their economic, for their internal policies, let's say. So the refugee issue made that work harder and harder. For example, Iraq and Afghanistan inflation peaked at more than 30% during the mid of 2000s. In Yemen and Libya at more than 15% in 2011. On the back of collapse in the supply of critical goods of services, combined with a strong resource to monetary financing of the budget, Syria is an even more extreme case, where consumer prices rose by more than 300% between March 2011, when the crisis started, and May 2015. And so now we are in 2022, we are talking about more than 300. Also, in Turkey, we are now talking about inflation of 60%. It's a very big inflation percentage. Such inflation dynamics are usually accompanied by strong depreciation pressure on the local currencies, and we see this every day, which the authorities may try to resist by heavy intervention and regulations of cross-border flows. For example, the Syrian pound, which was allowed to float in 2013, officially trades at 1/10 of its pre-war value against the US dollar. If the 1 Syrian pound is 50, if one US dollar was equal to 50 Syrian pounds in 2010 or 2011, $1 now is about 4,000 Syrian pounds today. So the Syrians inside Syria has to carry a very big amount with them, and there is a very important notice that the biggest salary in the Syrian government today is about $50 in 1 month, the biggest salary. And if you are talking about the private section, I think it's about $75 to $100. This is the maximum salary you can get inside Syria. And of course, the prices for the commodities, it's now equal to Turkey or to Jordan or to any other country. This is a big.
That is actually a big disaster, and not just for these couple of countries, but also for the world economy, which we have been seeing. Time and again, we have seen these things affect the other countries as well, be it a normal trade, be it the resources that they have to procure. So if somebody from the outside wants to help for the cause, can you name certain ways that they can do so?
I think somebody from outside, so we are talking now about United Nations, and we are talking about the big countries, especially in the Council of the UN. There are many steps that the United Nations can take to protect refugees around the world and preserve their rights, such as enacting more laws that preserve the rights of the refugees to dignified and safe life in their countries of asylum, with their full rights to integrate into host societies, as I mentioned before, where, for example, work, study, and life, in addition to the laws that reduce racism towards refugees, which we see now very clearly. In some countries, the racism is getting worse and worse and worse against the refugee. But in my opinion, work must also be done to integrate refugees into their host communities so that they can live in safety and stability. Amir Shah, when we talk about refugee, we must not forget that we must focus on the main cause of the refugee crisis, and this is the point. For example, as we are now talking about the Syrian context and the Syrian story, the Syrian conflict wasn't started because of a flood or because of a nature catastrophe. No, it was started because of a political problem. From my point of view, the most important thing is to address the main cause of the problem. The United Nations isn't allowed, in my opinion, to separate this issue from its context on the pretext that the United Nations doesn't interface except in humanitarian affairs. There are political arms, as we all know, for the United Nations and for the big governments that should be more effective in resolving the origin of the crisis, regardless the inclination towards the policy of any country. And this is the main problem, again, from my point of view. We must not ignore this point. We must not only talk about the humanitarian aids. We must not only talk about the humanitarian context. We have to focus about the origin of the problem and to solve it. Because if we cannot solve the origin of the problem, we cannot make anything better for the refugees around.
Exactly. So it was something that was avoidable, something that was man-made and synthesized. And we should not forget why it started in the first place, so that in the future we do not see any Syria happening in any other part of the world.
Yes, yes, and for sorry, we are now seeing again. Yani we are talking now about 84 million refugees around the world, and we are talking about the numbers and statistics of the years until 2021. But we now have a new issue, which is Ukraine issue. We have now a new million and million of refugees inside Europe.
Exactly. So talking about the Ukrainian war, even
Yes.
that could have been stopped, and it was. It's just adding up to the problem. It's just adding up to the wildfire.
Yes.
That's creating even more and more unrest in countries around them, and in those countries as well. So this this was about how can the international organizations come in and help the people, or at least make sure that their rights are protected. But when it comes to the general public, people like me, people like you, so how can we do our bit in helping these refugees?
Okay, in my opinion, at the level of individuals and small groups, they can contribute to creating a greater understanding and awareness about the issue of refugees and the reasons that promoted them. Again, I am focusing on this point: the reasons that prompted them to seek refugee and leave their homeland and go through the long road to asylum, which is very important. The majority, for example, of refugee cases, for example, in Turkey, the majority of the society, they don't know why exactly the Syrian left their countries. They think that there is a war inside Syria, and this is wrong. We don't have a war inside Syria. We have a conflict because a political issue that when a group of the people refused the regime that controlling the country, and the regime started to kill the people inside Syria. So it's not a war. We are not talking about two armies as happening now in Ukraine and Russia. We are talking about different issues. So most of the, for example, Turkish society, they don't know why the Syrian exactly, as I mentioned, left their country. Sorry. So maybe the individuals and small groups can make or can play a role to let them understand very well why these people cannot come back to their country. But again, in my opinion, even individuals and small groups cannot make a big effect in this issue, because they need more resources, they need more support, they need more tools to use in these campaigns, let's say. So again, the small groups, the individuals who are already making these campaigns or these efforts, they need a support by UN, they need a support by some big organizations around the world, they need a support by the big government who knows very well about this sensitive issue.
That was surprising that people are not aware why people in their immediate neighboring countries are being displaced. And now I can really feel the importance or the crisis situation that so at least the people who are accommodating them should be knowing the reason of it. Until and unless that happens, I don't think any society would be welcoming towards them.
Yes,
So,
yes, exactly.
Yes, absolutely. So talking about all of these aspects, I am very sure we must be having some positive stories that you must have come around. So I'm really looking forward to listening to any kind of positive stories that are out there that can motivate the others.
We have a lot. Actually, we have a lot of positive stories. I cannot remember them all, or let's say I cannot remember the most important stories of them. But I know some women. I know one woman who lost all of her kids, or not kids, yani, all of her children in Syria, and she came alone to Turkey. And when she came alone, she crossed the border walking. She walked about 17 to 18 hours to reach Turkey. Of course, she did that in non-formal way. And when she came, she didn't have anything. So she started to go to some small organizations or small group of people, and she lent. She didn't ask for money. She lent some money from them, and she started to cook in her home for the other families or the other people, especially the Syrian people in the city. And she started to also learn the Turkish language. And in 2 years, she could give back the money and rent the home with her own money. And she started also to sell the food, not only for the Syrian, but also for the Turkish neighbors. This is very important story for the women who lost everything.
That is amazing, and I have come across the story. I'm not sure, but it was something where the girl. Okay, let's not go there because I cannot recall most of it. So I did read about a successful businessman who was a refugee as a kid, and then he got education, and he is actually famous. I remember reading about him, but I cannot recall the name. So so this should just be a reminder that there are problems that has existed as long as the humans have existed, and it will continue to exist.
Yes, we have actually we have many examples of these people. We have about more than three, 4 or 5 young men and women who achieved the honor in their university, in their Turkish university. We have one in Dubai. Everyone heard about him. He got the prize of $1 million for being the best programmer, and he donated of half of this prize for the Syrian refugees. We have another 2 or 3 in Canada. We have another 2 in US. We have many examples in Europe, especially in Germany, which has also about 1 million Syrian refugees. So yes, we have many of these success stories.
This is really very heartwarming to listen to. And with this question, we have come to the end of the interview. And thank you so much for agreeing for this and shedding light on a topic that is very sensitive and that should be recognized and should be paid some attention upon by not only communities but also by international organizations, so that actual change can be made.
So, thank you very much, Amir Shah, and thank you for Goodera, and thank you for having me in this meeting. And again, I want to emphasize again that we should not say celebrate this day, more than saying to care about this day for the refugees around the world. Thank you, Amir Shah.